The 1920s were known as the Roaring Twenties due to the cultural and economic boom of that decade. Businesses spread all over the country because of the automobile. The car gave the consumer the ability to go places that are inaccessible by foot. Also, the gas station and convenience store sprouted from this invention. As well as the automobile, the first transcontinental mail service was created with the airlines, in which the Pan Am was the first. Consumerism was at an all-time high because of the installment plans, which were paying for items over time, gave the nation a false sense of wealth. Buying stocks on margin created a lot of fake wealth for consumers. This decade set the stage for the Great Depression. Advertising became a huge marketing technique in the 20s. These ads turned luxuries into necessities. They picked on people's insecurities, making the common person feel like without a certain product they are not normal. These ads were not always truthful either. Many times the truth was highly exaggerated in order for the products to sell. The Listerine commercials are a great example of how these ads manipulated people in the 20s. Harding was elected in 1920. His main goal was a return to normalcy, which ended the Progressive Era. His presidency was stained with scandals like the Teapot Dome and the Ohio Poker Gang, in which he hired his poker buddies for offices. Coolidge took over when Harding died in office. His goal was to clean up Harding's mess with tax cuts and high tariffs. His tenure was popular during his presidency, but lost popularity during the Depression. His main slogan was, "The business of America is business." Hoover was elected in 1928, and his presidency was the gateway between the Roaring Twenties and the Great Depression. Throughout the 20s, the U.S.'s foreign policy was isolationism. The people were scared of being drawn into another war. 3 different actions were taken to enforce isolationism. Washington's Naval Conference was a movement by the Western naval powers to reduce the number of naval ships. The Dawes Plan was when the U.S. loaned money to Germany to pay reparations to the Allies, who then took that money and paid it back to the U.S. And the Kellogg-Briand Pact was a pact for no offensive war, and there was no means to enforce it. Science was greatly advanced during the 20s. Taylorism, which were mathematical equations used for labor, streamlining tasks, and to increase production, was created. Also, many new household appliances were created, which made the common housewife's life much easier. The TV, toaster, and iron were invented during this time. Also, insulin was discovered by Sir Francis Grant, and penicillin was discovered by Sir Fleming. The 20s was also known as the Jazz Age. African Americans brought the culture of music to this era, creating the style of jazz. This became the music style of America. Musicians like Louis Armstrong and Duke Ellington were famous musicians of the time. The entertainment business of America had advanced greatly in the 20s. Magazines were created like Time and Reader's Digest. Also, new sports heroes like Babe Ruth were idolized. Movies were revolutionized with the first sound movie, The Jazz Singer, and the first colored and talking movie, On with the Snow. The radio was a major source of news and entertainment. The KDKA was the first commercial station in Pittsburgh. Coolidge issued the Radio Control Bill, which formed the Radio Commission. Anti-unionism began in the 20s. John L. Lewis created the new union, the CIO, Congress of Industrial Organization. Also, strikes like the Boston police strike and the United Mines turned the government against unions. Religious fundamentalism is the idea of a strict interpretation of the Bible. This belief arose from the advancement of science and evolution. The Scopes monkey trials was a battle between religious fundamentalism and evolution. Clarence Darrow defended Scopes and William Bryan prosecuted. Nativism is the idea that immigration is bad for the country. The WASP, or the White Anglo-Saxon Protestants, were considered dominant. Social Darwinism played a huge role in nativism. This also led to the revival of the KKK. The National Origins Act and Emergency Quota Act were created with the influence of nativism. Prohibition started with the passing of the 18th Amendment. The Volstead Act defined what an alcoholic beverage was. This led to an increase of organized crime. Speakeasies were created, which were places that people could buy alcoholic beverages. The Harlem Renaissance was the revival of black culture. White people started to attend black music clubs like the Cotton Club. Even though these musicians were well respected, outside of the clubs they were still subjected to segregation and discrimination. All of the famous jazz musicians, as well as poets like Langston Hughes, were big influences of the Harlem Renaissance. Black nationalism was the idea that segregation should be celebrated in the African American community. Marcus Garvey created the United Negro Improvement Association and believed African Americans should return to Africa. The Great Migration was the movement of thousands of African Americans to the North in search of jobs and equality. These beliefs were not fulfilled because the North was basically just as bad as the South. The whites in the North were fearful they would lose their jobs to the blacks. The biggest discrimination the migrators felt was in housing. Women began to fight for rights in the 1920s. They gained the right to vote in 1920. Also, the flapper was created during this time. Some positives of the suffrage of women were equal marriages, more free time, and the ability to work at home. Some negatives were less pay than men, a double standard, and a conflict between traditional and modern ideas.